In this next unit, we're going to be focusing on the process of cellular respiration, which is how our cells make energy. This organelle right here is what's known as the mitochondria, which is different from the chloroplasts, which plants have, and plants use to catch sunlight and turn it into sugar, because the mitochondria here is used for the purpose of generating energy for our cells. Both plants and animals have mitochondria, but in plants, the chloroplasts generate the sugar that are eaten up by the mitochondria. In animals, we have to eat meals, food, to get the glucose that we need. Now, before we can really talk about cellular respiration, we have to know what the word respiration means in the first place. And it has two different meanings, whether we're talking about a cell or an organism. And we're going to start with organism. In an organism, the word respiration just means breathing. So when I say that you're respiring, that means that you're breathing. Just means, overall, that respiration is a process of us taking in oxygen. We need to take in oxygen because the mitochondria, that guy we saw on the last slide, is very, very, very hungry for oxygen, and we have to fuel it. However, in cellular respiration, it's a little bit different. Cellular respiration is how cells get energy from fuel, mainly glucose. That's what we're going to focus on. Occasionally lipids and other compounds, but glucose is the big one. Like I said before, just like in chloroplasts, where they take energy from the sunlight and change it into sugars, here we're going to be taking sugars and changing it into energy. So we call this the reverse of photosynthesis. There are two main types of cellular respiration. Now, we've got our first one right here, aerobic respiration. Now, when we think of aerobic exercise, we mostly think of things like running, swimming, dancing, and other things that get us really breathing hard in the process. And that's a great way to think about it, because aerobic respiration is what we do when we have oxygen. Oxygen is what this is all about. So this is definitely the best. Cells love aerobic respiration. It produces a lot of energy, and it's our main choice that we try to use whenever we can. Anaerobic respiration is a little bit different. Anaerobic is what we do when oxygen is not available. So if you think of anaerobic exercise, we usually think of things like weightlifting or sprinting or other things that may be difficult, but they don't get us breathing quite as hard, which makes sense because since we don't have any oxygen available, we're not breathing so much. Anaerobic exercise is exercise that doesn't need as much of that oxygen. Now, anaerobic exercise is also known as fermentation, which you may have heard of before and you'll see later on in the presentation. There are two main types of fermentation, lactic acid fermentation and alcoholic fermentation, but we'll go into more detail on those later. So here's a diagram of an animal cell, just like you've seen before in our cell unit. And what we're looking for here is mainly the mitochondria. These guys right here. See how it says mitochondria right here? There's more than one of them. If you look, you can see one here, there's another one here, there's another one here, there's another one here, and a bunch more looks like in the background over here. They're scattered all throughout the cell for the same reason that the U.S. doesn't have just one power plant in the middle of it. And you can see my really ugly United States map drawn up in the corner there just shortly. Now, if we had just one power plant in the middle of the entire United States, it'd be really hard for us to ship that electrical energy out to all the different parts of the country and make sure everyone got their power. However, if instead we had lots of little power plants all over the country, like we do right now, then each neighborhood just gets its power from the local power plant, which is a whole lot easier for everybody involved. There's lots to go around. The same way we have all these mitochondria all through the cell just supplying their neighbors. So this rough endoplasmic reticulum probably gets its energy from this mitochondria. This Golgi body probably gets its energy from, hold on, just figuring this out still, this mitochondria. And this smooth endoplasmic reticulum probably gets its energy from this mitochondria. So they're scattered all throughout the cell so they can share and share alike. Now we're not going to spend too much time talking about all the different steps available in this system, but there are 3 steps that you need to know. Just like photosynthesis had 2 steps, starting with the light reactions and then following up with the Calvin cycle, respiration has 3 steps. And the one we're going to focus on shortly here is called glycolysis, which means the splitting, that's what lysis means, of, that's right, glucose. Glucose is getting split apart in this first step. Now, the important things to know about glycolysis are that 1, it occurs in the cytoplasm. We're not actually in the mitochondria yet. We're still in the juices, the jello that fills up all the cell. It's a big, long sequence of reactions. There are a lot of enzymes involved in other things. We're not going to focus on all the individual steps. It's not really important. What's important is the big ideas. And here's the big idea right below here. We change glucose, which we've seen before, remember that's sugar, into 2 of what's called pyruvic acid. So that's the main idea behind all of this right here, is that glucose changes into 2 pyruvic acids, and that's what happens in the process of glycolysis. Now there's a ton of steps here, and I want you to go ahead and copy down all of these. Pause the presentation if you need to make sure you get all the words, but you're not going to have to memorize all these words. I just want you to see that it's a fairly complicated process. We got step 1 up here, where at first ATP and an enzyme change the glucose to something called fructose, which you've probably heard of in high fructose corn syrup. It's a very, very, very sweet chemical. Second step, ATP and another enzyme split that fructose apart. Then all kinds of mess happens here, changing that fructose into what we call pyruvate, or pyruvic acid, which we saw on the last slide. And finally, NADH, not NADPH. NADPH was in photosynthesis, it's just NADH, and ATP are produced. What's important about all this, the reason we see it, is look which chemical shows up again and again in this, ATP. Remember, ATP is the main chemical that gives us energy. And without that ATP, we wouldn't be able to move or dance or sing or jump or anything else that we enjoy. So this ATP is really what we're focused on here. This is the important result of all of this. This is why we do all this in the first place. Whew, that's a lot to look at. But don't worry, you don't have to know all of it. Here's what you need to know. The stuff we already said. The glucose starts things out. In plants, they get it from photosynthesis. We get it from our diet. The glucose eventually gets split into 2 pyruvates. So know that glucose makes 2 pyruvates, like you see right here. And then, look what else. ATP, we saw that on the last slide. 2 of them go in, 4 of them come out. So if it costs 2 to get started, but we make 4, the important thing to remember is 4 is bigger than 2. If we invest 2 and we get 4, 4 minus the 2 that we originally used, that means overall we're making 2 ATP. So we're still producing energy. We're not really consuming it. Also, there's those NADHs we saw before. These are going to be turned into ATP later, but not as part of this particular presentation. Here's another way of looking at it. Glucose splits up into 2 different pathways, both leading to pyruvic acid down there at the bottom. Here we're spending 2 ATP, but here we're producing 2 on this side and 2 more on this side. So overall we've got -2 up here, but +2 and +2 down here, giving us a total of 2 left over. And here's those NADHs I was talking about a second ago. You don't have to memorize this. This is just another way of looking at the process. Last slide for this particular one. You've done a great job getting this far, guys. This is the net or overall glycolysis reaction. So you need to know this the same way you knew the reaction for our wonderful photosynthesis. 1 glucose, right there, plus 2 ATP, those are the 2 we spent at the beginning, plus 2 NAD pluses. These aren't important now, but we're going to learn about them later. Give us 2 pyruvates. This can also be written pyruvic acid, but it's the same thing. 2 NADHs and 4 ATPs. Remember, 4 of these is bigger than 2 of these, so we're still making more over here, like it says down here. Ta-da! Now, the whole reason we talked about that crazy NADH up here is later on NADH gets converted into, what is it? ATP, that important molecule we're looking for. Fantastic work, guys. Nice job copying this down. I'll see you in class.